Hello and welcome to a new video. Having played and finished Talos Principle 2, I figure I would do some free running and give my overall thoughts on the game. The first Talos Principle is one of my favorite games of all time. I greatly enjoyed the puzzles and the philosophy and the general design of the areas, and I do think that the second game is a very strong sequel for what Talos Principle 1 brought to the table. As far as the puzzles go, I think most of them I actually really enjoyed, and I enjoyed most of the new mechanics. My favorite, I think, is probably the teleportation one. I really enjoy figuring out, how that item fits into getting through the puzzle. You know, where it needs to go, what steps need to be taken. It's why I think the golden door puzzle for that level is also my favorite of those particular versions of, harder versions of the puzzles. I also greatly enjoyed the drilling one, the one that kind of opens a portal on certain surfaces. The RBG one is alright, but it's not quite my favorite. I do actually really like the one where it can kind of capture the laser color, and then you can move that around. It's kind of like having a laser color source on the go. As far as the mechanics that I didn't enjoy, I'd say the two that were the worst for me was, one, the thing where you have to swap an item to get an item. You probably heard when I arrived at the puzzle in the penultimate level, the other one with the giant statues, that once I saw that, I let out an exasperated sigh. And that's just because I was really hoping that I would enjoy that, because I guess the other mechanic that I neglected to talk about was the one where you had those things that have like a sphere of influence, and figuring out how you can use those to unlock the gates and how to get them to where you want them to go is also pretty enjoyable. Most of the levels have been very enjoyable, I would say. The other mechanic that just didn't really do it for me was a body swapping mechanic. Maybe it's just because one or two levels I just simply wasn't getting it and starting to get frustrated, but I don't know, that mechanic just didn't click with me, which is a bit unfortunate because I do think it can be a pretty neat mechanic. I will say most of the levels that utilized it were still pretty fun. It really is just the item swapping thing that I just really did not enjoy, and if there's a Talos Principle 3, I kind of hope that's a mechanic they throw in the bin. Which, mind you, they have, axed different mechanics and whatnot already, like those floating black spheres with the red laser lights that come out when you get too near to them. That was completely scrapped and left only in the waking up Minerva part as a kind of interesting callback, as well as a kind of little challenge. I think the reason that was scrapped is because it's not very precise. Talos Principle puzzles work best where when you do a step, you can just kind of stand there and think about what the next step is. And that's also why that one gold puzzle where you have to like put the pylon down and then rush over to a different area to get through some doors before the laser gets cut was also really frustrating and not fun, especially since if you fail, you pretty much have to reset and do the entire puzzle all over again. The puzzles with those floating platforms could have been worse than they were. I think they were able to kind of avoid that pitfall of just being immensely frustrating to deal with, because what needs to be reset takes only like a few seconds, and it more or less happens automatically with those things. But I do think the puzzles were overall well designed. Some of them were kind of dumb in retrospect, where it turns out that in order to solve them, there's just this really, really simple thing that I completely missed. Oh, it'd be cool you could go up those. But I did enjoy figuring them out, and even for most of them, even for the ones that kind of stumped me for a while. But in addition to puzzles, Talos Principle is about philosophy, and I do think the game shines very brightly there. I made a video a while ago talking about how we could use more optimistic stories in science fiction. Less cyberpunk, less everything is shitty, less what if we technologically advance and that ends up being bad, and more like, hey, here's a machine or a scenario where good things happen, where humanity can achieve a good ending, where humanity can prosper and shine and thrive and all of that. And it seems odd that Talos Principle 2 would be that, given that the backstory of the game is mankind has more or less killed itself through human-caused climate change and released a deadly virus that ended up wiping everyone out. And the deadly virus part hits a lot closer, having played the game this year as opposed to when I played the game, the first game, due to the pandemic that happened a few years ago. So you would think that a game that's basically like, you know, the backstory is humanity bad ending wouldn't be optimistic, and yet it actually is. I don't think it's any secret that the developers have a certain opinion and they espouse it heavily in the game. They do think that mankind can flourish and thrive, and they do think we should strive to ensure mankind can flourish and thrive. And the entire nature of the way things are now is these robots only exist because some human beings were able to work together and utilize their talents and utilize the technology available to them to ensure that some aspect of the human race is able to survive its extinction. And by virtue of being humanity's children, these robots should do what humanity failed to do and industrialize, thrive, reach for the stars, explore the galaxy, learn, discover, explore. mean, yes, there is like the option to like say, technology bad or expansion bad and whatnot, but I'm pretty darn certain that the developers have a certain opinion, and when Talos Principle 3 comes around, the Byron ending and waking up Minerva and all of that will be like the proper, ending. I like the philosophy in Talos Principle because it's pragmatic. It's not just endlessly delving deeper into more and more obscure terminologies and subjects and ideas, but actually addressing man and his place in the universe and what to do. I feel like philosophy has kind of steered away over the centuries into squabbling over different silly concepts that may not even have a basis in real-world reality. I think that the advent of science has kind of upset some sects in philosophy because, well, for example, human evolution. That happened. There's no going back. So if you have a philosophy about man and his place in the universe and whether he can trust his perceptions and even his morals, you have to pay the Darwin toll. Otherwise, your philosophy's pretty fit for the bin. But I don't think philosophy has to run counter to science. I think philosophers should try to understand science as much as they can and utilize it when discussing the world. Because even though I'm not one of those people who think that you can't use like the scientific method or anything to figure out what's right and wrong, you can't get an ought from an is, but you can when you have an underlying goal in mind, and therefore can actually examine what has happened in the world when the ises were one way or the ises were another, and make a determination about what you ought to do if you want to reach that goal. But for some things, science can't crack because we don't have it yet. One very well-known topic is artificial intelligence. What should we do about that? And we're increasingly running into the prospect that it may be too late for us to figure out a level-headed game plan in regards to that. After all, with the advent of AI art and AI voice mixing and AI, writing, ChatGPT and whatnot, I think it's telling that a lot of artists and authors and actors have been so vehemently against this. And that's just like, a kind of still stuck in the computer, not able to really do much else sort of scenario. What if AI is in a machine that has legs? What if we apply AI to warfare? And also the issue of, quite frankly, so many people are just really fucking stupid. As George Carlin put it, just imagine the average person, how dumb he is, and then realize half of everyone is dumber than that. AI could be misinformation's greatest asset. It could be a tool used en masse to spread lies and propaganda and falsehoods, and hell, I don't doubt for a second that it's already been utilized that way, especially online. Imagine a very convincing video of, say, the President of the United States formally declaring war on another country, and a very convincing video showing Congress approving of that war. Imagine how riled up the right wing of American politics would get if there was a convincing AI video of Biden saying he's going to have the military go home to home taking everyone's guns. They've been convinced by human beings of stupid ideas and falsehoods, and AI would easily dupe them. And this is, I think, what philosophers especially should be thinking about. They should be thinking about... Oh, there's Byron. Oh, it's not.
I'm tired of waiting. Sometimes I think Mother is stalling. Like, we could already be done with this, but she's afraid of what will happen if we contact New Jerusalem. Our discoveries are amazing, world-changing. But how much longer can we sit around on this island? None of it means anything if people don't know about it. Can they really be so afraid of change?
Maybe the holograms respawn, or maybe new ones come out when you save Minerva. Anyways, I think philosophers should be futurists. I think philosophers should focus on trying to figure out the best way of handling new and novel technologies. In some regards, science fiction authors are sort of those philosophers. They consider a world where X fantastical element is a thing that exists in it, and what the consequences might be as a result. But unfortunately, even now, science fiction is kind of looked down upon as a genre of fiction, despite it being far more relevant than just about any other thing you might have been assigned in schools or whatnot. Hey, Coot. And you're actually a Coot, not a hologram. And you interrupted, my train of thought, so now I forget what I was going to say next. The game, maybe I'm just biased in favor of the game's message because I'm already predisposed to, secular humanism and a appreciation and fascination with science and technology and discovery. Obviously, if you're someone who thinks absolutely everything was made for the benefit of mankind, and we're like some special creation of a deity, a game like the Talos Principle, and which, in order to fully become human, you have to basically defy God, and the Talos Principle 2, which espouses the values I mentioned before, might not be, the most fun game to have to shift through and listen to the developers' ideas. I mean, that's entirely possible, but nonetheless, for what the game does show and write, I do genuinely really like it. One thing that the game probably should have done better, though, in my opinion, is exploration. Yes, there's things to find, there's these panels with text and voice logs, there's, hidden puzzles and star puzzles. But Talos Principle 1 was interesting because there were so many different things you can do to get around the game that you honestly don't know if the devs intended for you to do it or not. But you were able to do it in such a way that's so flawless and effort and almost intuitive that seems like they did intend it. While I enjoy the movement in Talos Principle 2, I do think it is a step down from the first game. I don't think the platforming is as good as Talos Principle 1. I understand and appreciate the effort the devs made to try and make Talos Principle 2 as mechanically similar to the first game, despite doing so on a different engine, but I can tell that it is still a different engine all the same. Additionally, there's just far less like Easter eggs and, little things to find here and there than the first game. Like, far less. And that seems, just a little bit jarring, given that it seems like they released the game. It almost makes it seem like they released the game much earlier in its development than Talos Principle 1. Or some major change in development philosophy happened with Pro Team. But comparing the amount of, references and Easter eggs between the two games is almost night and day. I guess you can argue that the first game takes place in a simulation, and that's why there's references to stuff like Portal in there, whereas this takes place in actual real-world reality, as far as, the landscape goes. The structures are evidently conjured up by Athena's mind, and therefore there's less likely to be these Easter eggs, but, still, it could have been fun. As far as the characters go, I do like most of them. I kind of wish we got a little bit more time with Byron, since he's kind of like the optimist and exploration-heavy voice of the team. And when he's gone, I mean, yeah, I kind of stood in for him because I overall agree with him. But then you kind of end up with much more hesitant robots out there. I'll also say that if they do Talos Principle 3, as much as I like the characters, it would be nice if there was like an area or two where they weren't there. And then you can have kind of the, serene isolation that was so prevalent in the first game. Like, just this whole simulation area, and you're kind of the only body in it. I mean, yeah, there's Elohim and Milton, but one's a voice in the sky and one's a computer terminal. I haven't seen any other holograms, so it's really weird that one was there. And it will be interesting to see what Talos Principle 3 brings, which I'm pretty sure they will make, given that this game sold really, really well. I think it had the most concurrent players of any of their games, and was really well received. A lot of 8s, 9s, and 10s from professional reviewers, overwhelmingly positive on Steam. Gamers seem to give this game a thumbs up, so why not make a third, especially since evidently Talos Principle at some point during the course of its writing was supposed to be a trilogy. And if you collect all the stars, there's the implication that you're going to be doing the third game way out there in outer space. Which will be interesting to see, what they do with that. Like, is there going to be a mechanic where there's, like, lower gravity? and you have to work with that with different puzzle elements, or maybe higher gravity, or maybe like there's an asteroid somewhere or a moon up there that's kind of blocking the sunlight and cycles, and the sunlight affects certain technologies that are used to solve a puzzle. Is it going to take place on an O'Neill cylinder, or even a Dyson sphere? Or the fact that, there's a theory of everything, and the robots now seem to have a mastery over the laws of physics, structures that we would, as of right now, consider technologically and scientifically impossible. As far as the settings go, I do appreciate that they try to, still instill great sense of beauty into the environment. Even in environments that are supposed to be the ruinous results of mankind's disregard for the Earth's well-being. Having concrete juxtaposed with natural environment is like a very easy and reliable way of creating beauty. You also see that in games that have, other post-apocalyptic games. One that comes to mind is Kirby and the Forgotten Land. That game kind of does that. But really, for a game of Talos Principle's philosophy, I think the devs need to, crack open the work of Robert McCall. He was an American painter who, 20th century American painter whose bread and butter was depicting extremely optimistic futures. His paintings have a very retro future feel to it, which I guess is fitting because retrofuturism is now kind of synonymous with optimism. He worked for NASA. He worked partially on the first Star Trek movie. I think the devs should look into his work and incorporate that into Talos Principle 3 if they're doing robots in space, because I think that would synergize the general look of the area with the message at hand extremely well. But overall, yeah, I do think the environments are very lovely looking. I've never been too partial to kind of foresty environments though, so the first 3 areas were, just kind of there. I know they are beautiful environments, but foresty areas just never really did it for me all that much. I've always been more of a desert guy. The music in the game is great. I've actually been listening to the soundtrack on YouTube and very much enjoy it, and I think I've mentioned in my Let's Play before that I've had some parts of the song stuck in my head for a few days, just kind of playing there rent-free. And I do hope that when the 3rd game comes out, the soundtrack is equally as strong. I guess if there's one criticism I have about the environment is, the first few games, or the first, 3 chunks of area, it's mostly natural landscape and then some outstanding central structure and a few, enclosed areas with puzzles and stuff. And that was kind of it. But then you get to the last 2 levels and you have one level with these massive carved up statues of people that you're able to run across, and some of them are holding up puzzle areas in their hands and whatnot. It's so grandiose. And even here, you have this spaceport, but it's not just this one thing in the very center. There's it's all around the level. Its presence is known as far away from where you're actually supposed to go to meet Prometheus as over here. And I kind of wish that some of the other levels, more levels, were equally as grandiose with what they showed. I think they didn't hit the mark with, making it more and more and more grandiose. I think it's kind of very, very same-ish design philosophies for the first 3 chunks of the game, and then the first area you go to for the last chunk of the game, and then all of a sudden super grandiose giant statues, spaceports with pillars everywhere. I think they could have handled that transition better, or figured out a different way of making some of the other areas come off as more grandiose. And given that, the next game is presumably going to take place in outer space, I mean, what isn't the limit at that point? All the strange worlds that could be the areas it takes place on, or near a black hole, or supernova, or running along platforms hovering barely over the surface of a star. I think in terms of hits and misses, Talos Principle 2 is definitely more hits. I guess I'll also say that the star puzzles are kind of hit and miss. For the Prometheus ones, those are kind of easy because it's just find a spark and then follow it into the statue. But sometimes the other puzzles come off as so obtuse or just plain dumb that you end up liking the Prometheus stars more, because they have the courtesy to just be there, be simple, and then piss off. The Sphinx ones are hit and miss. I like the ones where you have to either touch buttons and put them in a certain pattern, or those pillars. Some of the ones with switches were alright. I like the one from the second area where you see the numbers and you have to kind of figure out, it's the numbers of the puzzles. But then there's ones with switches where it's there's a switch, this tiny ass little switch attached to the edge of one of the puzzle areas, and you just kind of need to run around it until you see it. And I think one of the last Sphinx ones, the diagram wasn't even accurate to where the switches were. Similarly, the Pandora puzzles can be kind of annoying because a lot of the time it's just you need to be hyper aware and spot this teeny tiny little pylon or whatever in order to know that's something you need to connect it to. I think the Pandora ones are best when there's at least a dotted line coming from a pylon to her, and then you can sort of work backwards. But if you don't spot that little pylon and you're trying to figure out what angle, is there a puzzle area over there that maybe I can have a line of sight to over here, that just ends up wasting a lot of time. And maybe in some regards that's my fault, because I do like all of the levels, you know, all the area in one go, and so if I spend a bunch of time doing that, I'm just exhausted and less likely to enjoy any of the puzzles or other stuff, but still, it can be obnoxious. So I hope that when Talos Principle 3 arrives, and if they do have stuff like it, it's just better designed, I guess. I'll say this, like, sometimes it comes off as like, I didn't fail this because I'm dumb or couldn't figure out the puzzle or whatnot. I failed this because of something just immensely stupid that I missed. I didn't spot, like, you know, out there in the environment. And therefore, like, there was no way for me to have successfully done it. But if I spotted it, then I would have solved this easy. Oh, wow. Prometheus, there's no collision on you. Nope. Interesting. And I guess that's like one of the things, like, you know, this right here is super simple and even looks like it's something the devs... If this was Talos Principle 1, the devs absolutely would have anticipated that some gamers would go up there and then hop here and then, like, go into here and there'd be like a goofy Easter egg. Or you'd be able to climb up to, like, the top of the Prometheus statue, and there'd be something funny up there. Poor Prometheus, he doesn't have a wing. Hey, Melville. And I guess that's, like, you know, one of the biggest hurdles for a puzzle game in general. You want players, if they fail the puzzle or just not getting it, to feel like they're not getting it because of, you know, an issue on their part, rather than the puzzle just not being well designed. And I guess that's why I don't like the switching mechanics, because it's like, look, if I had that stupid item out here now, I would have this puzzle solved, like, in seconds. You know? But overall, in terms of hits and misses, I do think Talos Principle 2 is far more hits than misses. As a puzzle game, I certainly enjoyed it far more than Scorn, and I have a feeling that the ideas the game espouses are going to linger in my head for a lot longer than whatever Scorn was trying to do. But, I'm still not sure if I liked it more than Talos Principle 1. Maybe I should go back and play that game a bit and make a determination. But, you know, it's something for me to continue to think about and contemplate. In any case, that's my extended thoughts on the game. I hope you enjoyed the video, that I gave you something to think about and otherwise entertained you. Take care.